Hello, good evening. Welcome. I'm Mark Pinto here with you from Phoenixville Public Library, and welcome to the next chapter in the Community Gardening Around the Village series, which has been going strong since last October. We are going to take a break for August, though, but we'll be back in September, and I'll tell you more about what the September program is at the end of tonight's event. Tonight, we're going to learn about sowing for fall seedlings. Can you believe fall is 2 months from today, actually? We're glad to have with us tonight Ryan McCaughan. He's got a degree in elementary education from Westchester University and has taught 4th and 5th grade for a few years. He is an avid home gardener and has spent time traveling and working on farms. For the past 10 months, he's been a garden educator at the Chester County Food Bank. And so we welcome Ryan. Ryan, thanks so much.
Oh, pleasure. All right, so today we're going to talk about our fall garden. First, let's talk about where I come from. I'm with the Chester County Food Bank. I work with the Raised Garden program. We go to various different organizations, schools around the area. We build them raised garden beds. We help them by providing them seeds and seedlings, as well as educational support for their programs. So we emphasize strongly in growing a 3-season garden, and that includes fall. So today we're going to talk about growing for fall. It is the summertime right now, but this is the time to start planning and getting your seeds and seedlings ready for the fall harvest. So I'm going to share my screen here. What we're going to do is a quick slideshow for the first, say, 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to consider when planting your crops for fall, you need to consider what kind of crops. There are basically 2 different types of crops. We like to separate them between cool weather and warm weather crops. So your cool weather crops would be your brassicas, and they are your kale, your broccoli, cabbage, collards, etc., as well as some of your carrots, spinach, beets, garlic, lettuce. So once you have kind of determined what crops we can grow, the next thing we need to consider is when are we going to plant them? So most of this information will be on the back of your seed packets. So your seed packets have a ton of information, and a lot of almost everything you need will be on the back of those packets, as well as on the websites of the various different seed companies, and we'll be visiting that in a second. So when to grow? First thing you want to identify is your first frost date. If you are in the Chester County area, it's going to be around October the 15th. But that can vary depending if you're in the north or south of Chester County, if you're in different areas. So you could just simply put in your zip code into one of the many different websites out there that will define when your first frost date is. Once you find out your frost date, you next determine by your crop, when you look at your seed packet, what are the days of maturity, meaning how long will that crop take to become ready to eat? And then you simply kind of work backwards from there. So for example, broccoli, depending on the variety of broccoli, and we'll talk about that, as the variety is very key. For example, there's some varieties that are 57 days to maturity. So you take October the 15th minus 57 days, and it's August 15th is when you'd want to get that in the ground. And that is for transplants. And we'll talk about the difference between direct sowing and transplant. So we typically grow our seeds, and we get all our seeds from Johnny Seeds, and they have actually a calculator to do all of this hard work for you. So I'm going to quickly kind of show you that right now. And if you go on their website, they have these tools and they will help you. And you go down to plant, you click on your fall harvest planting calculator. It'll pull up an Excel spreadsheet. Once this pops up, you come in here and it has a list of most of the fall crops, and you enter in your, it's not allowing me to do that up here. Anyways, you would go in here, you would put in October the 15th, and it will calculate with you all of the dates you would need to put these in. On the left here, you're going to see DS, TP, TP, and they stand for direct seeding or transplant. That means you need to direct seed it by this date, or you need to transplant it by that date. Now, don't go by these dates because that frost date is wrong, but that is a very great tool you can use for finding out which crops you want to grow and when you need to put them in. So that's a tool that we use as well as others, but the basic way to do it is find out when your frost date is, the day's maturity, and work backwards. So to give you kind of an understanding of what we do and some of the ranges that we have seeded here, those dates are like the ultimate day that you can plant it in. So these are some of the crops that we have planted, and I just wanted to kind of give you a range here. So we did our first seeding of our kale on June 25th, and our last recent one we did on July 8th. You could probably still put in some, but we like to get a head start. Cabbage, same, June 24th, and our last one we seeded was July 12th. Lettuce, we put some in July 5th, and we're going to probably seed again in around August 12th. And spinach is more of a frost hardy crop, so we're not gonna plant those until about August 5th, and then our last one we'll probably put in around August the 20th. So that kind of gives you a range that you don't necessarily need to put it in this date or that date. It's more of a guess, because that frost date is not an exact science. It's more of a guess. So make sure you take that into consideration. The next thing you need to consider, as we saw before in that chart where you saw the DS or the TP, is if you're going to directly seed these crops or you're going to transplant these crops. So what that means for your growing is direct seeding is mean you're going to directly put the seeds into your garden bed. And some crops prefer this versus others. A lot of them being your root vegetables like your carrots and radishes, turnips, because they don't like their roots disturbed. So when you don't want to transplant them, so you want to put them directly in the ground. Also, one of the benefits of direct seeding is it doesn't disrupt the growing process. So for example, so let me explain what a transplant is, and then I can kind of explain that. So a transplant is basically when you grow in a container outside of your garden, and this can be any type of container. We'll show that process in a second, but we're doing this to give our plants a head start. So we're growing in a separate container, then taking that once it's kind of grown to a certain stage, and then transplanting it into our garden. When you do this, it kind of disrupts the growing process of the plant, because you're basically, as it says, you're growing in a container and you're containing it and not allowing it to grow for a certain point of period. Now, if you're a perfect gardener and you're growing it and you're waiting and you're watching those roots and you can see exactly when those roots are about the time when they need to go into the next place, then that's great. But all likelihood, that's not going to be the case. So the benefit of direct seeding is the plant can grow at the speed it wants to grow, and it has no obstacles to grow, and it usually grows a more faster pace. But the benefits of a transplant is it gives you a head start in the growing process. So right now you probably have lots of crops in your beds that you don't want to take out. You have still lots of your summer crops that are doing great. You don't want to take them out. So we're going to grow them in containers outside of the garden and allow them to mature to a certain level, and then we transplant them into the garden. This allows you better time to plan your garden. It also helps against weeds and pests, because when you put them in the ground, they're pretty much well established. They're not fighting for nutrients against weeds, and they're a little bit hardier, so they can resist against pests. Also take into consideration when you are transplanting, there is a transplant shock. What that is kind of what I was explaining before, is you're taking them out of the home that they were growing in and putting them in a new home, and they need to adjust in that period. So usually there's about a 2 weeks delay in growing when you transplant. So take that into consideration into your growing time. So let's say you are going to grow seedlings. When you're growing seedlings, these are materials that you will need. And I'll be showing you a video in just a minute explaining all this. Basically, you need containers, It can be really any container as long as it's not a like painted material or treated lumber or anything that would have any toxins that would leach into your soil. And then you need soil, a good potting mix. Do not get something from the ground. Don't just take regular compost. I recommend don't skimping out on this process and getting a good solid starting mix. Something with good drainage, enough nutrients to supply the nutrients to your plant. Then you want seeds, water, labels, and then fertilizer, which we'll talk on in a minute. So here's a video of us seeding at the food bank. So I will just play this for you, and hopefully this works. If it doesn't, let me know, because I might have to enable the sound. So Mark, just let me know if the sound's not working.
Nope, don't hear anything.
All right, that's what I thought. Give me 1 second. I think I need to stop sharing and
Yeah.
1 second here.
Yeah, make sure that thing is checked. Yeah.
Yep, I got it now. All right, so we will go back. The time to start thinking about your fall action. All right, welcome to the greenhouse. It is July. It is very, very hot, but this is the time to start thinking about your fall transplants. So to start this, basically the materials that you'll need is you need some type of container. Right here we have your typical plug trays. These are called 128s, 128 cells. Then we have more of our 6-pack, much larger. If you don't have that, you can do something simple like an egg carton. You could do a red Solo cup, an old yogurt container, basically whatever you have. The important part is that if you are going to use something like this, making sure that you put holes in it, because it does need drainage. So whatever you choose, make sure it has drainage. Next, you're going to need a good potting soil. Right here, as you can see, this is a nice good potting soil. The one thing you do not want to do is go outside and just dig up some soil from the yard, because that will not be good. It doesn't have the proper drainage. So don't skimp out on your potting soil. Make sure you get a good potting soil. And lastly, you'll need is your seeds. So basically, and then like I always do, is have some type of label and a marker to write down the date and what you are seeding. So basically what you do is you are going to fill up your container with some soil. I'm doing it in this little 6-pack here, just so you can see. And you're just going to want to make sure it's nice and loose in there. You don't need to pack it down too bad. And then as far as the depth and what you're going to need as far as how you're going to plant this, it's all on the back of your label. The important things to notice are the days it takes to germinate, the temperature, and the depth of the seed. So there's always the sayings, you want to do it twice as deep as the seed, but don't go by that. Go by what the seed packet says. Once you have that, you're just going to pour it out in your hand. This says 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deep. So we're just going to make little impressions in the soil. I like to make just a couple in each. And I'm going to do 2 or 3 in each just to make sure that it germinates properly. You can always thin out later, but you don't want to use all this soil, go through all this work, and then nothing to germinate. All right, after you put the seeds in, then you're just going to pinch in a little bit more soil on top just to cover those holes. And that's it. The last thing you're going to do is you're going to water it in. I just have a water bottle here, and you're just going to spray it in. You want to make sure you don't want to use like a heavy stream on here, because it could wash away the seeds. Make sure you use something with a spray, and make sure that you water it thoroughly. You want to make it almost where the water will start to drip out the bottom. You want to make sure it's not just watered on the top inch or 1/2 inch here. Go all the way to the bottom. And once it is fully saturated and the soil is fully saturated, the last thing you want to do is label it to make sure that you don't forget what it is. So just write the date and what you are planting. And that's all. All right. So one note to mention about that is when you are deciding what type of container you are growing in, note that the larger container, the more soil you will need. And so if you're growing a large amount of plants, if you're growing in large containers, it's going to take a lot of soil. So what we like to do is, I showed you previously, we have those trays that are 128. If we grow it in there and a couple don't germinate, it's not that big a deal because it's not a ton of soil wasted. But if you are growing, you know, lots and lots of plants and you're growing them in big, you know, yogurt containers, and you have 50% germination, that's a lot of soil wasted. So take that into consideration in the types of containers that you are growing in. So the two most important things when growing seedlings are your temperature and watering. So we'll talk first about temperature and where to grow your seedlings. Temperature dictates basically where you're going to grow these in. Like I mentioned in the video there, always check the back of your seed packets where it will say the ideal germination temperature. So some crops in, for example, lettuce, spinach, and cilantro have a cooler germination rate than some of your other crops that you're growing in the fall. And their ideal germination rate is around 70 degrees. And right now, as you can tell, it's not 70 degrees outside, it's more 85 to 90 degrees. So that will actually inhibit your chances to grow those crops. So what we do is we take our lettuce, our spinach, or cilantro, and we actually grow them in the basement of the farmhouse. So we will take them, we'll throw them in the basement because in the basement it's around 70 degrees, which is ideal temperature for growing those crops. But the big thing you have to do is you need to monitor them daily. Check them in the morning and check them in the afternoon to see if they have sprouted. Because once the crops have sprouted and they have poked their little heads up through the soil, they're looking for light. And if they can't find light, they're going to keep reaching taller and taller and taller until they find that light. And if you don't get them before it's too late, they become very, what we call leggy. They become very long and they become weak. What you want is a short, stout plant. So if you are going to be growing something inside, for example, like a lettuce or a spinach, check them daily for when they sprout. And as soon as they sprout, get them outside and get them into light. If you're growing other crops like your broccoli, your cabbages, kale, beets, and you're planning to grow them in containers, you can grow them outside. The temperatures outside are ideal for that. So I'll talk more about how to do that properly. But what I want to show you is next is the germination guide. These are guides that I took right off of the website of Johnny Seed Select. And they kind of give you the optimal range temperature for these crops. So the first one in the top here is the optimal temperature rate for lettuce, which is around 68 degrees. But once you get higher than that, you get to 75, 80, it starts to lower your chances of germination. You can still grow and you can still get germination in these, but you know, the lower the temperature, the higher the temperature gets away from that ideal point, the least chance you have at growing. On the lower level here, or the lower example we have here, this is broccoli. And the ideal germination temperature for broccoli is around 77 degrees. So that is something that we grow outside, and it can grow all the way up to about 86 degrees. But if it gets to the 90s, 95, that could definitely hinder your germination. So what happens when you're growing outside and the temperatures are really, really hot, over 90 degrees, it can limit your chances of getting good germination. So some solutions, some helpful hints, what we like to do is we like to make sure that we water in the afternoons, because anytime you're watering your seedlings in, it's going to cool the temperature of your soil. So we make sure that we water in the afternoons, especially on really, really hot days. And the next thing we do is we put a insect netting over our seedlings. And that does for a couple of things, but one of it does is it helps to prevent direct sun from hitting our seedlings, which again will keep the temperature down a little bit. Another thing you can do is kind of arrange your seedlings so that they're not in the direct sun all day. Maybe avoid getting them in the direct sun during the the heat in the middle of the day, maybe find some shade during that time. So those are some things you have to think about, because weather is one of the temperature is one of the biggest obstacles when trying to get seeds to germinate. So here's our growing situation that we have outside, and I'll kind of just let you see how we grow things outside.
All right, welcome to the outside of our greenhouse. This is where our fall seedlings come to live. So after we've seeded them, we bring them out here and we basically grow them right outside. When they are still young and they're still growing, we put them under netting here. This is for two reasons. One, it helps to protect it against the direct sun, as well as it helps to protect them against birds coming in and picking them off. Once they've grown to a proper size, we take off the netting, as you can see here, and we let them grow out in the sun. The one thing to keep in mind is they could possibly get too hot during germination, and hence why we put the netting on top. So this is where we grow. Thanks.
All right. So the next consideration after we thought about temperature, whether we're going to be growing them outside or inside, is how we're going to water them. Watering is definitely the second biggest factor in caring for your seedlings. One thing you want to do is keep your seedlings moist. You don't want to overwater them where they become so wet that nothing, it's just too wet, but you want to make sure that they stay nice and moist. Now, it's hard to say how many times a day you're going to have to water them, because that all depends on the weather. If you have an extremely overcast day, you might only have to water them once a day. But if you have a really, really hot day and it's a windy day, wind plays a big factor in drying out cells. You might have to water 2 times a day. And like I said, sometimes watering in that afternoon will really help keep the temperature down on in your soil. And as I mentioned in the video before, make sure you water all the way through your tray, making sure that the water comes out the bottom of your container. If you only have the top half of your tray or wet, that means the bottom half, where the roots are located, are not going to be getting the water and nutrients that it needs. As I mentioned before, we put a netting over our seedlings. And as I mentioned there, one is that because birds will come and try to pick out the seedlings and eat them. 2, it helps directly hit them from direct sun. And also it helps protect from heavy rains. When you get really, really heavy rains and you have seedlings in there, if it's pounding on those seedlings, it could knock out some of those seeds. So that netting kind of gives it a nice little barrier. But with that in mind, when you are watering them, sometimes when you're watering over top of those that netting, it can kind of wick away that water, and the water won't go into the cells. So what we like to do sometimes is to remove the netting when we're doing our watering, and then put the netting back on after we're done watering. So keep that in mind. So this is something to take into consideration, like I was talking before about the size container of you're growing in. The smaller the container, the faster your roots are going to outlive its home. So I'm going to show you some examples of what something we call when a seedling becomes root bound.
All right, so as you are growing your seedlings, you want to periodically check on them, make sure that they're healthy and that they are not outliving their time in their cells. So what I like to do is I like to actually come down and pop them out of their cells. As you can see in this case, this one has a pretty healthy root system here, and this one I would say is ready to go into the ground. For example, we have another one right here. This one is what we call root bound. The roots have nowhere to go, so they start just spiraling in and out and start suffocating the plant. So if you are ready to put this one in the ground, that's great. If not, you need to bump it up or pot it up into a larger container so that way it can continue to grow and not become root bound. All right.
All right. So like I was just mentioning there, deciding the size of your container is important, depending on how long you want it to live in that container. If you only want it to live for a short time, you can choose a smaller container. It's going to live for a longer time before you put it in the ground. You need to choose a larger container. If you're not ready to put it in the ground, but it has become root bound, you can then transport it into a larger container, which we call potting up, bumping up, planting up. There's many different ways to say it, but basically you're putting it into a bigger home so you can grow before you can actually put it into its final destination, which would be in your garden bed. So the next thing you need to think about when you are growing is how to give the plant nutrients. So in a plant, in a seed, it has what we call your seed leaves. And these are in the picture here. They look very similar no matter how you're growing them. Once they pop up, they're going to be little small round leaves. And they are the seeds that actually originate, and they are held in the cell, and they provide the nutrients for the plant as they're growing. But once the plants start to get their true leaves, the true leaves are what the plants will actually look like once they are grown, they need to then become supplemented and giving some more nutrients. So once the plants have established their true leaves, that's when you need to start fertilizing your seedlings, because they no longer have enough nutrients in the potting soil in order to give the plant its nutrients. So what we like to do is we provide them with fertilizer. The one fertilizer that we use at the farm is fish emulsion. Other ones you can use are kelp or seaweed. These are all organic fertilizers that we use. If you don't want to go the organic route, you can choose other types of fertilizers, but we choose to grow organically at our farm. And once you see the first true leaf, that's when we begin to want to fertilize. And you want to fertilize about once a week, if not more, maybe once every 5 days. And we use a liquid fertilizer, meaning that it's liquid. There's other types of fertilizer, granular fertilizers, that I'm sure some of you are more familiar with. And those are something that you would sprinkle into your soil. The reason why we don't do that when we're growing our seedlings is because we don't want to disrupt our soil. And granular fertilizer is usually a slow release fertilizer, and a liquid fertilizer is more of a immediate relief to your plants and will give the nutrients they need right away. And that's because we have such a limited space that we're growing in these small containers. So you want to fertilize with a, like I said, a fish emulsion, seaweed emulsion, kelp emulsion, something of that sort, so it has a nice balance of the NPK. And again, about once a week or once every 5 days. Now, when growing your seedlings, obviously some problems might arise. If your leaves are looking a little droopy, probably means you need more water. If seedlings are a little too tall or leggy, like I described before, it needs light. It's searching for light. So the place that you might have put it might not be getting enough light for that plant. I know a lot of people think that they can grow seedlings in a windowsill, and usually that's not the case. Usually growing it in a south side of a window is just not going to give it enough sun. So I'd recommend growing it outside, but you might have a case in your house where you do have a nice sunny windowsill where you could grow it in, but that's something for you to decide. But you're going to need at least 6 to 8 hours of pure sunlight. And that's not like partial sunlight, that's 100% sunlight to get on there. If your tips or leaves are dry and brown, it might be because you're getting too much sun or you over fertilized your plants. And then if your leaves are getting a little yellowing, that means you need nitrogen and you need to fertilize your plants. All right. Now, if you decided not to do the transplant and you decided to directly seed your plants, that is like a case where we're talking about if you're going to be planting carrots or radishes, something like that. It's pretty much the same process. During the germination period, you need to make sure that your soil stays moist. The seed needs to stay moist during that germination process. If it dries out at any point, it really, really limits the chance that that seed is going to germinate. And always check your weather. A good gardener is always checking the weather and is always observing to see how much rain we're getting and how many times I need to water this. So there is no exact number. I can't say water once a day, water twice a day. You need to kind of pay attention. And the old rule is use the finger test. Go out, put your finger in the soil, see if the soil is moist 6 inches down below. If it's not, water it. Normally you're gonna have to water at least once a day. So check your soil regularly and make sure that your soil stays moist during the germination process. As you saw when I was seeding those crops, I was putting 2 to 3 seeds in per cell. And I do the same thing when I direct seed. I overseed. You don't want to go crazy overseeding because then that creates competition, but you want to make sure that you have enough seeds in there where it's going to germinate, because there's a good chance that not all of your seeds will germinate. So I like to put, at least 2 to 3 seeds per area where I'm growing. And then once the seeds, if you get all of them to grow, you can then go through there and we call thin out the plants, meaning kill 2 of the 3 and only leave 1 for your area. So check your seed packets, like I said before, and find out what the proper spacing is. So that way you know how much to thin. Some other fall tips when you're growing your seedlings outside. A lot of crops, like your root vegetables, are one and done process. So when you're growing your carrots, if you're growing a bunch of carrots, I recommend doing succession planting. Plant them every week or 2, so that way you're not getting all your harvest at one time. As you see in the picture, we like to plant, 1 row of carrots, and then 2 weeks later, plant another row, and then 2 weeks later, plant another row. So that way we have carrots continually throughout the season. Another thing to keep into consideration when growing in the fall is row cover. You can see in the picture there, what we have there is row cover. This helps for 2 reasons. One, it protects against pests. A lot of your brassicas, and your brassicas again are your collards, kale, cabbage, they are very vulnerable to pests in their early stages. So when you first transplant your crops, make sure you put some type of row cover on there, where you can even put an old water bottle on top of it, something to protect it from the pests in the beginning stages while it's growing, because that's when they're most vulnerable to pests. Just like humans are when they're young, they're very vulnerable. As they become more mature and their immune system builds, then you can, let them out into the wild. So make sure that you put some type of protection right away. Also, it extends your season, so you can grow late into the season. We were growing spinach last year all the way through the winter, even with that snow, because we had row cover over our spinach, and because spinach is a very frost hardy crop. So a row cover is a great thing to use when growing in the fall. So that's about it for our growing in fall. And yeah, we'll now open it up for questions.
That's great, Brian. Thanks so much. That was wonderful information, and the videos are great too.
Thanks.
Please feel free to, you're welcome. Please feel free to unmute yourselves, folks, or put your question in the chat if you prefer. Anyone with anything for Ryan? Wow.
I guess that means it was too good of a presentation.
I know.
Looks like, hi everyone, I'm Cleo. I also do the gardens program at the food bank. Nice job, Ryan. It looked like there was someone, maybe Deb, who looked like maybe she was trying to unmute. I'm not sure if she had a question or not, but.
We have 10 people visit the food bank. Yes, you can visit our garden at Springton Manor Farm in Glenmore. We have volunteer shifts. You can come and you can come volunteer with us and ask questions and learn as well.
Actually, I don't know why my video went on. My question was, how do you work with the schools? Do you pick certain schools, or do they, how does that work?
Great question. So we have already established relationships with over 45 different schools in Chester County. They mostly reach out to us. They know about our program, but we've been working with them for years now. And if you're interested, if your child goes to school and they want to get involved, you can reach out to us, and we get started in that process. And we just, yeah, we work with pretty much any school that would that wants to in the Chester County area.
I'm trying to plan out when I get to retire, what I'm gonna do. So I've always wanted to work with food somehow, something. So that's great to know. Thank you.
Well, you can always come and volunteer with us. That's a great way to get your feet started. So we have, if you go onto our website and just click on the button at the top that says volunteer, and you can search, you can either volunteer with us at the raised bed garden program, or you can actually help and actually work on the farm. We have 2 full-time farmers, and we farm, we have a farm at Springton Manor Farm, and we also farm at Pete's Produce in Westtown, where we grow on over, I think currently we have 8 acres there that we grow on. So yeah, and you can see in the chat, you can click right on there, Volunteer Hub, where you can click right on there and help volunteer, get started.
Hi,
There's a
I'm Megan. I
question in
have
the
a
chat
question.
for you.
Oh,
We'll go with Megan first, and then we'll go to the chat.
Okay.
hey, what do I need to do to be able to reuse my soil after the season's done? And I have all of this expensive organic soil in these giant pots.
Are you talking
How
about
can
potting
I-
soil?
Yeah, so I have, this year, we just moved in. So this year I did smart pots, so giant fabric pots outside, because I didn't know exactly where in the yard I was going to get the best sun and how we were going to use the yard. And so we bought a ton of organic mechanic soil, and I don't want to throw it away. Like, I want to be able to reuse it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I have to do to amend the soil to use it next year when I actually have raised beds in?
Yes, so you can, if you want to just, you can put them right in your raised beds, so it's good soil. But if you want to reuse them again for your pots, what I suggest is adding some organic matter into it. So that would be through some compost, and maybe even getting another bag of that. So what I like to do is, if I have like some 2 or 3 old pots, I'll put it into a large container, mix them all together. Then I'll add another bag of like fresh potting mix with some compost and maybe some slow releasing fertilizer, some organic fertilizer. Mix it all up, make sure you mix it good, and then repot everything up that way. So you just want to make sure you're adding some more organic matter and some fertilizer in there, but absolutely can reuse that soil.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I got one in the chat here. Are there any disadvantages to starting seedlings hydroponically? I have never started seedlings hydroponically. We grow with hydroponics, but we actually start our seedlings for our hydroponic systems exactly how I showed you in that video. So we would start them in regular soil, and then we transplant them into our hydroponic system. But I don't know about any disadvantage to growing your seedling hydroponically. So I just don't have as much experience in that. So sorry, I can't help too much there. Any other questions?
If nothing else, Cleo, did you want to say a few words?
Not much, except for thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Ryan for doing that awesome presentation. And yeah, I posted 2 links in the chat. One was just to the volunteer section of our website, and the other one is to the raised bed garden section of the Chester County Food Bank website. There's a bunch more resources there about just gardening stuff in general. So that's a good thing to check out if you are interested. And yeah, you can reach out to us. My email's on our website too, if you have other questions.
Thank you. Great.
We also have other classes there too. We'll be having a class this fall. It's a Seed to Supper class. It's a 6-week course. If anyone's interested, you can click on our website, and there's a wait list that you can join there. And we will be posting exactly when that class will be starting, probably in the next week or 2. And so, yeah, but we have lots of videos on our website, and some of the best ways to learn is to come out if you have the opportunity and volunteer with our farm, our farmers, or ourselves.
Right. And speaking of videos, the video from tonight's event will be on the library's YouTube channel sometime early next week. And I'd like to invite you to the next a program in the Community Gardening Around the Village series. We're skipping August and going to September, and our next program is going to be a live in-person event at the library. Can't
All
wait,
right.
it'll be the first one in the series. On Monday, September 27th at 7 o'clock. Program is called The Abundant Harvest, How to Preserve and Process Your Fruits and Vegetables. And it is a lecture demonstration with Elizabeth Alexei, who's a Penn State Master Gardener and an instructor at Longwood Gardens. So look for more information on that on the library's website and other media. Well, thank you again, Ryan, for tonight. This was great.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone else for tuning in.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Great.
Everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your night
Thank
now.
you.
Thanks, everybody.